Okay, let's see. Do I have to more?
Hello, Akua. Can you hear me?
Now I can. Hi. Oh,
Hi.
I was so
You,
worried.
you should have been told, I suppose, Irish time means a little bit later than everybody else.
Oh no.
I'm here.
I'm so delighted to see you.
I'm relieved to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Of
Thank you.
course. And what a wonderful background.
That's a painting by my son Gerard, who's an artist. It's actually a giant
He is.
in his underpants, as you can see. Not based on Gulliver's Travels. That's actually that image is Persian and is quite ancient. And my son, for one of his exhibitions about 2 years ago, did a series of paintings being a modern riff on some of those.
Oh my gosh.
And this is the room, actually.
How blessed you are to have a child like that.
Yeah, well, the house is full of artists. If any of us could earn a living, it'd be great.
One of my favorite things in your bio is that you're a full-time poet. I'm impressed.
Yes.
Why are you
wouldn't
laughing?
Be so...
It's not.
Well, it's absolutely true. But the thing is, I spend most of my time living on smoke.
But you've managed. Then you are a magician because you live on smoke, and yet you look sustained and well fed.
I'm too well fed at the moment. I'm about 2 stone overweight.
Wait. So let's do some work first, because
how
do I say skatana foul blatha?
Okay, that's skahona.
Okay, hold on.
Skahona.
Skahona.
Fui.
Oh my gosh. Oh, my poor lazy tongue. Okay. Skahana fui.
And the last one is vlo.
Loth.
Vlo. Say V, vlo. And I'll say it again for you now, the whole thing. Skahona fui vlo.
Skahana fui vlo.
Yeah, oh, that's very good. That's excellent. That's better than me.
You're such a gentleman. You're so gracious. Okay, and do you say Shiva or Shiva?
Oh, Shiva.
Shiva.
But if you pronounce it Shiva, that's okay, because this is an international reading.
I know.
We have our different ways. Shiva.
But I'm not one of those people who if you tell me that John was Jan, I would say Jan. I would not say John. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
So, all right. So the last one is Listowel Award.
It's Listowel.
I knew it was something other.
Yeah, Listowel.
Listowel.
Say list toe as in your toe.
Right.
And then ul. Yeah, wool will do, but actually it's Listowel. So if you say ul instead of wool.
But I'm a New Yorker, so
yeah, that's that will forgive you of everything.
I was gonna say of all the variations of Americans' inability to say anything.
Listen, I am Irish. I'm quite ignorant and quite happy to be ignorant.
New Yorkers have their own take on it. Listowel.
Listowel, you have it perfectly now. The only other one is Temple Glanton.
Yes, but that I thought, okay, then I guessed right on that. Temple Glanton.
Yeah, you have that perfect.
Well, but that was easy because it says Temple and Glanton.
See,
what else would you say?
Some people would pronounce that Temple Glantine.
Oh, or Glanton.
But you didn't, so you get a gold star.
Well, okay. I don't know if you know anything about America.
A little bit.
How would right? So I'll spell this word and tell me how you would pronounce it.
Okay, all right. I'm going to write it down. Okay.
Okay. It's
Try
a
it.
name. It's a name. It's a
All
name.
right.
Houston.
Okay. Well, we have a railway station of that.
So do we. Yes.
Yeah, and we call it Houston or Houston.
You say
Houston.
Houston or
Houston.
Houston.
Houston, we say.
Okay. So in Texas, where
Yeah.
there's a city, they say Houston.
Yeah. That's what
And,
I thought. So I think the two
wait.
Houstons.
No.
Oh, is there
I'm not
more? Is there
through.
more?
In
Oh.
New York, we say Houston.
Oh,
And
right.
it's a subway station stop.
So you have one of your own.
We have one of our own.
Well, our Houston station is a railway station. It's the main railway station in Dublin.
So it's an important subway stop in New York because it's near World Trade Center. It's in Lower Manhattan.
I've seen that written down and thought it was Houston. Very good.
So
Right.
so that's just to explain how crazy things are. Okay, now it's 6:57 and I've got to try to get us live on Facebook.
Okay.
And that's going to take about 3 minutes.
All right.
I will introduce you. I will say a bunch of stuff. I will introduce you. You'll know when it's your time. So just hang on while I click things and you'll know where we'll begin when I say welcome.
Okay, perfect.
So hopefully this will take me to live on Facebook. Okay, where do I want to share it? I want to share it on a page. It's just that there are all these screens upon screens. Share on a page I manage. Oh, it's not letting me. Come on, let me.
Oh, it will. We've got 2 minutes yet.
I know. It's not letting me.
2 minutes is a long time in Ireland.
Oh. Is it?
Yeah. We do everything in 2 minutes.
You're amazing. You're amazing people. You're amazing, amazing people.
We have a name for them. We call them the last 2 minutes.
I was going to say it's the magic, which I'm going to ask you about. So if you don't read about it, I'm going to ask you about the magic because people have been nibbling on your magic forever. And I wonder how you feel about them appropriating your myth.
I have no problem with that.
Really?
None whatsoever.
Title.
And there's a reason for that, because I think cultural appropriation is one thing, and I think it's a separate thing. But I think creative expression of something you love just adds to that. Although I know it's a very tricky subject. Actually, I might mention that at some stage.
Well, if you don't, I'm gonna ask you about it. So let's see.
Good.
What else does it? All right, it's live producer. Yes, I gave you the title. Say something, John. Okay. Whoa! It wanted me to. It's so demanding. Well, I had to. I mean, one would think if you're going live, it would just go live and ask you for details like the title and the. Do you know what I'm saying? Because you're going live at the moment, you've got to go live. But let me double check because I believe that we're live.
Okay.
It's not letting me see if we're live, but it said that we're live.
Oh, we better then behave ourselves just in case we're
Just
live.
in case, just in case. Oh, it's 7:01, and I've just admitted our guest.
Oh, we have a guest, so that's very good.
We have a guest via Zoom. Um, but I'm not going to unmute him. I'm going to say, because it's 7:01, welcome to the 9th reading in the Speculative Sundays poetry reading series, where every other week you can hear the poetry of possibilities. We are live on Facebook via Zoom. Happy New Year! This is our first reading for 2021 and our first for our new season. I'm Akua Leslie Hope, speaking to you from the ancestral land of the Onondaga, also known as the Seneca, keepers of the Western Door in the Southern Finger Lakes region of New York State. I pay homage to the Seneca, past, present, and future, and to my own ancestors by whose grace I exist and am sustained. I'm delighted to say that this series is supported in part by the Artist Development Grant Program administered by the Arts Council of the Southern Finger Lakes and funded by the Community Foundation of Elmira Corning and the Finger Lakes. Speculative poetry. The poetry of possibilities includes alternate history, cryptids, monsters, cyberpunk, dystopia, fairy tales, fabulism, fantasy, folklore, futurism, horror, magic, mythology, occult, paranormal, robot, science, fiction, shifters, slipstream, solar punk, space opera, superheroes, supernatural, sword and sorcery, sword and soul, steampunk, time travel, post-apocalyptic, and weird. It takes all poetic forms plus sci-fi coup. I'm delighted to introduce today's reader, Jan W. Sexton. John lives on the southwest coast of Ireland. He's the author of 7 full-length poetry collections. I'm so impressed. The most recent of which is Visions at Temple Glanton. His previous collections are The Prince's Brief Career, Shadows Bloom, Skohana Fui Blau, a book of haiku with translations into Irish by Gabriel Rosenstock, Vortex, Petit Mal, The Offspring of the Moon, and Futures Pass. A chapbook of his surrealist poetry, Inverted Night, was published in 2019, and he has a collection forthcoming, The World Under the World, great title, from Salmon Poetry. He also created and wrote the children's science fiction comedy drama, The Ivory Tower, for RTE Radio 1. I had to look up RTE. It seems like it's Ireland's national television slash radio station, which anyway, this series ran to over 100 half-hour episodes. His novels based on this series, The Johnny Coffin Diaries and Johnny Coffin School Days, both published by O'Brien Press, have been translated into Italian and Serbian. Under the, under the ironic pseudonym of Sex W. Johnston, He's recorded an album with legendary Stranglers frontman Hugh Cornwell entitled Sons of Shiva, which has been released on Track Records. He's past nominee for the Hennessy Literary Award, and his poem, The Green Owl, won the Listowel Poetry Prize in 2007. And also in 2007, he was awarded a Patrick and Catherine Kavanaugh Fellowship in Poetry. He's a full-time poet and earns his living by teaching under the Irish Writers in School scheme, which is administered by Poetry Ireland. We need that in the US. I love that idea. And also through writing residencies and editing. I thank him for staying up till what must be the wee hours of the morning in Ireland and sharing his work with us. Thank you, John. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Akua. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's just gone midnight here in Ireland, and I'm living up on a mountain called Corran. And the townland that I'm living on is called Carks. Corran, you might recognize the word, if I pronounce it this way, cairn. A cairn is a burial mound. Well, the reason the mountain is called Corran is because there's an ancient Corran on the peak of this mountain. And I'm just living in the shadow there of the mountain. And I'm living on a townland called Carks. And Carks is the Irish for hen. But of course, it's not named after domestic hens like chickens. It's named after pheasant hens, because this is all mountainy land that I'm living on. And if you shake a furze bush or just walk through the ferns, you'll disturb pheasants. As they say over here in Ireland, the place is paved with pheasants. And that's why this townland, a very ancient name, is called Carks. I'm going to read a few poems now, a selection of poems. And then I understand that we're going to have a question and answer and discussion afterwards. If at any stage, Akua, you want to stop me to ask a question after a poem, just ask a question. And I'll try my best to give an answer. You're shaking your head no, right? Okay, that's good. All right, I'm just going to start with some more recent poems. And these poems now will appear in my next collection, The World Under the World, which is forthcoming from Salmon Poetry here in Ireland. And the first poem is a piece of science fiction. Inaugural address for the donning of the starlight suit. The starlight suit is infinite. Once on, there is no removing it. Set the suit to receive starlight, and you will move in the direction of a given star's emission. Set the suit to expressed starlight, and you will hopefully thus excel in the speed of light. Good luck. You leave at dawn when the sun is up. We call this first light. And in your case, it is now resonant with new meaning. We have no idea what will happen. You may never stop. You may never arrive at anywhere conceivable as aware. You may become light itself. We imagine that will be the case. We wish you well. We wish we were you. We are grateful for your sacrifice. May you be forever bright. May you never darken. God willing, may you never come back. That is our ardent hope for you. Go with the stars. Be a part of everything we will see whenever we look up. I first started being a poet over 40 years ago in 1977. I was 19 years of age. The thing that started me off as a writer was science fiction and poetry. And there was no science fiction poetry really in Britain. So like many science fiction poets that came out of the 1970s, and I know the Science Fiction Poetry and Fantasy, Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association is full of us, we had to invent science fiction poetry. So I thought I was inventing science fiction poetry. My poetry really is metaphorical. It's I see myself as a fabulist. So here now is a different kind of science fiction. There's no science in it at all, of course. It's a science fiction of the distant past. I remember the past. Most poets do. As Michael Hartnett used to say, like all poets, I prophesize the past. Letter to an extraordinary woman. Although your hair, my love, is braided into 2 golden cords that could sever the heads of your enemies with a single swing, and although your nails, my love, could pierce the skull of either rabid dog or cantankerous dragon, there is no need to scale the tower wall to the room where I am hidden. I am resigned to where I am. My beard has grown through the tower's rooms, has filled the spiral staircase. I am snug in myself like a wintering mouse. The giant hag who stole me from my bed, who slipped me into the space at her breasts, then placed me to season for 7 weeks in a cleft of the moon, is soundly asleep on the ocean's floor. The tides have risen all across the coast, and her snoring stirs a tempest over the sea. When she wakes, she'll come back for me. She'll crack open the tower like the shell of a nut, root me out from my bed of hair, and I'll be a quick mouthful, sweetened by my sleeping. But what a death, my love. What a death to be a morsel for a woman whose head brushes the roof of the sky. After we are gone, there will be nothing but those dull mortals, mortals too ordinary to incite the sport of giants, mortals who will think of us and marvel, who'll marvel as I marvel now at the thought of my perfunctory finish. Oh, I like all that silent applause, isn't it great? Can only have that on Zoom. As I'm an Irish poet and a poet that sees myself in Irish traditional poetry as well as futuristic poetry, I spend a lot of time writing ballads, and I'm quite interested in balladry. So I'm going to read a ballad. Song of the Restless Gypsy. He woke from a dream of a golden coin as large as the moon, and the moon shone down on his sleepy-eyed face. So he said to himself, the moon is mine. So he left his house with the doors ajar, and the moths came in to eat the light. And down by the river he stood on the back of the drowning woman with her hair afloat, and she took him down to the mouth of the sea, and the moon shone down on his sleepy-eyed face. So he said to himself, the moon is mine. Then 3 white fishes came out of the brine, and one said yes, and one said no, and one said, we shall see. So he followed the fishes into the depths, one for yes, one for no, and one for maybe. And the ocean's wet tongue, it slobbered him whole, and it filled his mouth, and it filled his head, and the moon shone down on his sleepy-eyed face. So he said to himself, the moon is mine. Come down to my bed of sand, said the drowning woman to the drowning man. But he said, my love, I surely can't, for tonight I dreamt of the moon above, and I've left my house with the doors ajar, and I've followed 3 fishes to the ocean's floor, but I'll give you a kiss, and maybe 2, and when I've gone you can whisper my name. And the moon shone down on his sleepy-eyed face. So he said to himself, the moon is mine. And the drowning woman pushed him away, and her tears swelled up and filled the bay, and up he floated on his back and broke the surface with a slap, and seagulls came and pecked his skin, and fishes came up and nibbled his flesh, and some said yes, and some said no, and some said we shall see. And the moon shone down on his sleepy-eyed face. So he said to himself, the moon is mine. Then he came to the beach with the clattering stones, washed up with seaweed, sticks and bones, and a woman came down with her hair aflame and stood on his chest and whispered his name. And she said, young man, I'm leaving this place, for I dreamt last night of a golden coin. And the moon shone down on her sleepy-eyed face. So she said to herself, the moon is mine. And now a piece of urban science fiction, I think. What is our poetry? We can't be a judge of it, but anyway. This is called He Works in the Shadow Factory. He works in the shadow factory, turning the valves of the enormous tank. He watches the negative tons of raw shadow through the safety of a porthole. On the way to the works canteen, he passes the assembly line. Thousands of aerosols full of shadow rattle along the conveyor belt. It is the middle of summer, the factory's busiest time. The aerosols are stamped with the warning, for daytime use only. From the canteen window, he sees trucks leaving the factory gates. As he glances at his newspaper, he notes the latest public concern. A spokesman for the factory is quoted in the paper. The spokesman says the shadows occur routinely in nature. Even a newborn baby has a shadow. After work, he places his overalls into the mouth of an incinerator. Before leaving the building, he washes in the communal shower. He works in the shadow factory, turning the valves of the enormous tank. At night, He sleeps with the lights on, all of the shadows in the room in their rightful place. I'm now going to read a few poems from my latest collection, Visions at Temple Glanton. I was actually born with an ability, I think you could call it an ability. It might not be an ability, of course, it could be a disability, but I was born with the ability or disability of hearing things, hearing voices, and seeing things that other people can't see. It comes and goes, and sometimes this ability breaks out in dream. When I was a really young child, of course, I thought my experiences were common. I learned very quickly that they weren't. So I'm going to read a few poems from this collection. This collection actually, the title sequence called Visions at Temple Glanton is a series of visions and dreams that I had in recent times, and I worked my notations from those. Of course, a lot of Irish cultural literary allusions came into the writing as I was writing them down. So I'm going to read a few of these, and then we'll take it from there. I'm just going to read these. They don't have titles, so I'm going to read them, just a few of them, one at a time. And I leave a little break, a few moments between each one. The barmaid trims froth from the glasses of porter with a tailor's scissors. In the slop tray, there is enough for her unwedding dress of dunnish scum. You pull a sewing needle from the lapel of your dyeing jacket. With the loosened threads that hold your sleeves, you sew her dress in place. Piece by piece, less borrowed thread by borrowed thread, your jacket slips to the ground. In her new dress of dull foam, she steps to the window. Even the clearest light cannot brighten her unwedding train. Like a snail, she leaves a trail of stain as she steps out to the church. You follow in your grubby shirt sleeves. Thrushes are hoarse in the hedges. The blackbirds turn silver. You utter a poem of cliches to the spermatozoa you lost. Squadrons of sperm as lifeless as that dress, evaporating in sunlight. A noise of velvet has been in your head all morning. Your neighbor has sent you out to the meadow to capture the golden horse. He has given you a halter made of twisted straw. You do not believe in the golden horse. You believe the halter to be useless. The noise in your head stops. Violet is no longer coloring your mind. In the meadow, a golden horse is standing in the sunlight. You believe. On seeing you, the horse steps away into the shadow of the trees. It is no longer golden, you see now, but covered all over in mud. The horse evades you continually, trotting away at each approach. You throw the halter at it in exasperation. The noise in your head starts up. Violet is mined. The horse bends down and eats the straw halter. Violet wells up, overflowing. The horse's whinny sounds sarcastic, sounds triumphant as it trots away. In exasperation this time you shout, "Stop!" The word is Violet. The horse stops. You realize that the halter is now in the horse because Violet is certain in all matters. The horse must obey. Come, you say to the horse. Once upon the horse, you take a hold of its mane. Take a hold of its mane as fierce as you can. Carry me to the sky woman, you say to the horse, for I wish to present you to her. The horse gallops with certainty, for Violet commands it. At great speed, it crosses the meadow. At great speed, its hooves gain purchase in the air. You are astride it amongst the clouds. The noise in your head stops. You lose your sense of certainty. You falter. Your grip becomes faithless, and the horse senses it and shakes you. You fall through the sky. Another certainty becomes manifest. I'm going to read 2 more from this sequence and then I'm going to stop. What a mercy to you all. A soft thumping, like the subtle drumming of fingers, is at the window. You draw back the curtain and the glass is crowded with moths. The moon is full and still apparent through the massed bodies. You step out into the night. Yellow moonlight pours from your hands like honey. So much does it flow to or from your face, you are unsure which, that you are dazzled by it. Your garden has swollen since dusk, and a steep hill blocks your house. Your garden has climbed upwards into the night sky. But how could this be if you could see the moon through your window? The moon is embedded in the garden, high up near the peak, like a golden jewel. 3 hooded women stand before you. They are wearing moonlight, a moonlight so dense and cloying that it hides their bodies completely. You are wearing it too. You realize this as you look down at yourself. The moonlight is wrapped about you, has dissolved your clothing, even your hair. The moths hover about you, around the 3 women too. The women ascend the steep hill and you follow, stepping upon its lit grass. The surface of the hill is in motion and it carries you upwards, up to the embedded moon. At the summit, the moon is gone. The moths are legion. They cover everything. No light can penetrate them now. One by one, they cover the women who disappear accordingly, one at a time. Then the moths gather for you. Darkness then, a complete and overwhelming darkness. And now I've actually decided to read completely different things than I have marked, and this is why I'm doing all this flicking. So I'm just going to finish with this one. Your father's 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 father is long dead. You never knew him. You never even heard speak of him, not even his name. He calls to your door. You recognize him immediately. He is wearing a coat made of earwigs, all of them clinging madly to each other. The earwigs are fraying at the hem. Some fall to the ground. In your hallway, you see the moon now, just one grey eye peeping out from its face. Come out with me to the half-faced moon, says your father's 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 father. You follow him without hesitation. Your feet break the dewy grass as you make your way down the meadow. Something stirs low on the ground, its face shining palely in the half-faced moonlight. Come meet with me, the horned badger, says your father's 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 father. You look again. The pale stripe on the badger's face is lumping up. It rises skywards, a thin spectral horn of off-white fur. Come climb with me, the horn of the horned badger, says your father's 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 father. He steps on the badger's back and shimmies up the thin, furry horn. You follow him up, all the way up to the half-faced moon. Earwigs fall down from the hem of his coat, gather on your crown as a writhing cap. Come dress with me in the cloth of the tailor's tailor, says your father's 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 father. Thank you. I think I've read for just over half an hour there, I'm not sure.
Gosh. Oh my, oh, John.
Oh, I like that kind of response. That's very good.
I am, you made me cry. You made me laugh. You made me shiver. In fact, all right, let me bring it down because I know my voice gets high and I get loud when I get excited. May we ask for an encore? And I would love to hear, because another ballad, if you have one among the ones that you marked, I'd love to ask you for an encore and a ballad.
Okay, do you know what I'll do? I'll read a ballad. It's an anti-ballad, but it's still a ballad.
Thank you.
I think I might have, if I haven't got that marked, I'll read something else.
Okay.
I'll try to read that. Oh, here it is. Yeah, it's in this book. This is where I go flicking now because you see, it's not marked. I actually found the page there.
Totally
and
okay.
And then I've got it now. Here we go. When I say this is an anti-ballad, you know, I used to get very irritated, and I know lots of readers get irritated by, there's no such thing as a damsel in distress. And you know, when damsels want to be rescued, they do not want to be rescued by you, you idiot in your shiny eye. They want to be rescued by somebody else. And the person who they want to rescue them usually doesn't turn up, because men are like that, aren't they? So I kind of was thinking about that, and I decided to write an inverted form of that. So here we go. Let's have a go. It's balladic in form. I say that with absolute confidence and hope I'll fool you all. My love came riding. They gave her a hammer. She hammered me flat. She hammered my heart. She hammered me. Sunbeams her trembling gown. My love came riding on a white horse bleeding and grey clouds sliding down. They gave her TB and she kissed me bright. She kissed me right through with burning light. She kissed me. Sunbeams her trembling gown. My love came riding on a white horse bleeding and grey clouds sliding down. They gave her stilettos. She trod on my mind. She trod her dance through endless time. She trod me. Sunbeams her trembling gown. My love came riding on a white horse bleeding and grey clouds sliding down. They gave her a glockenspiel made from my bones. Happily, happily, she chimed them, happily. Sunbeams her trembling gown. My love came riding on a white horse bleeding and grey clouds sliding down. So there you go, an anti-ballad. I hope that gets me off the hook.
John, you're so marvelous. You're so you're so marvelous. This was so delightful. The reverse Rapunzel, I loved it. I loved your other ballad. I loved how you include landscape, sky, moon, sea, but to use an American phrase, but your riffs on them are endlessly inventive. It's very, I can only speak from my own cultural precepts. It's very like jazzy to me. It's very incredible to me. And the revelation that you're informed by more senses than we all always admit to is really quite amazing. Also, how you use that to inform a whole series of poems. But I will be quiet for a moment because there is a question from the audience, and I will have you entertain that before I have at you myself. So, has your viewpoint of fantasy changed from when you began writing poetry? If it has, can you explain what has made this change? And that's a question from our audience.
I don't think my attitude to fantasy or the fantastic, I prefer the word fantastic. I don't think my attitude has changed. I think what's happened is that, and I think this happens to all of us who work in the arts, I think I've become less satisfied with things that satisfied me far easier before. And you know, you mentioned something, I think this is relevant to that, because you mentioned place and landscape in my poetry. Well, Irish poets are obsessed with place, and it's said that Irish writers, like many other cultures, but Irish writers particularly, have a sense of place. Now, the thing is, I do have a sense of place, but really, that is a cultural trap. And part of the writer's remit really is to escape the cultural traps that they're in. And my way of doing it was always to subvert the trap and make it work for me. So I'm a landscape poet. The same, I think, with fantasy, in that the things that began to dissatisfy me with fantasy, the cliches and all the cliches of science fiction, the things that brought us into it, made us fall in love with it. And then we found that we were perpetrating them ourselves and we didn't want to. And I think that's the urge of most writers, not to perpetrate what's come before, to somehow bend it. So I don't think my attitude to the fantastic has changed. I just try to strategize to make it satisfying for me each time I sit down to write, with the reader in mind. And not only with the reader in mind, with an audience in mind. I believe in the performative nature of poetry. And I think, and I also, when I look at readers, I think of readers as someone, even if I'm not there, even if they're reading me on the page, I think on the page, the aspiration anyway, is to be performative, so that if somebody is reading it, they can almost see or feel you. So I don't think my attitude to fantasy has changed, but my attitude to the writers that I loved at one time, I don't love them so much anymore. And isn't that a challenge? Because that's a challenge for us, because someone is going to fall out of love with us. So we have to make sure that that's not going to happen. So I suppose my I'm sorry for laughing, but I laugh at everything, as you noticed at the very beginning, Akua. My attitude to fantasy hasn't changed, but my attitude to myself has changed, and I'm less satisfied with what I do now. And that's why I work in lots of different registers in poetry, for instance, from experimental to minimalist to everything. I know that I realize that didn't really answer the question, perhaps in the way that the person who asked it
Well,
was seeking an answer.
Hazel, if you need to know more, scribble it in and I'll ask it.
Oh yeah. Hello,
wanted,
Hazel. Thanks for the question.
I wanted John to speak on something. We started talking about this a bit before the session began, and there seems to be, I won't quite say ubiquity, but a maybe unearned easy familiarity with many of the figures of Irish folklore, or what I think is Irish folklore. When I think of the She and the Fae and Selkies, and I'm forgetting the name of I want to say like the Duwana, the woman banshees, the woman with the head, who with the, and I see these in figures from as far away as Japan through, of course, the Americas, and many writers using his own indigenous folklore. And I wondered how he felt about that. Did he see it as inappropriate, as appropriation, and or is it Ireland's gift to the world that we have this perhaps unearned easy familiarity with those figures? Also interesting how none of the poems figured those figures overtly, how they were all reimagined, reinvented, alluded to, or in the background, part of John's genius. But anyway, I'll shut up and please chat about that a bit for us, John, if you don't mind.
Okay, I'll answer that question two ways. Okay, first of all, about 22 years ago, there's an Irish science fiction journal which has just halted publication. It's been going for about 30 years. And about 20 years ago, they published through their publishing imprint, the Aon Press, they published the first anthology of Irish science fiction and writings of the fantastic, called Emerald Eye. I hated that title, by the way, but anyway, when it was first published, there was a big outcry from America. There was a big outcry from American readers of science fiction and fantasy, and they were wondering why we weren't writing about Celtic mists and the Celtic myths and the banshees and leprechauns and all the bejesus, all that. But there was a big online debate about it. Now, in my story, which was actually an extended prose poem, my story was called On a Planet Similar to Ours, the Virgin Mary Says No. And it was set on an alternate world, an alternate existence where Mary in our time, a Mary in a place recognizable to us, but on a different earth, says no to the call of God to bear her child, except she already has conceived that child and that child is inside her. Now, the thing is, a lot of readers, largely from America, were wondering why we were writing about this. But you see, my story at that time was reacting to Ireland of that time, where the church had lost the faith of the people. So my story was really a metaphor for all of that. So I think Irish writers we're not particularly concerned with our past. We're concerned with, if we go to the past, we riff on it and we do something else with it. But, you mentioned cultural appropriation. The first poem that made me realize, this was in 1977, I was 19. It was an old science fiction anthology from 1962. And it was Judith Merrill's The Best Of. It was in that series. And in that anthology, Best of the Year, there was a poem by Richard Matheson called The Jazz Machine. And when I read that poem, it actually blew my mind, because it had a lot in it that I was very concerned with at the time. The central speaking figure of the jazz machine is an African-American trumpet player, a jazz player. But of course, Richard Matheson was white. And he's speaking in the voice of an African-American jazz player. But ironically, the poem, if you're familiar with it, is about cultural appropriation, because the jazz machine of the story in the poem, the jazz machine is a machine that takes jazz and synthesizes its soul and reproduces the soul of jazz. And the inventor of the jazz machine who the narrator calls Mr. Pink because he's white, that man is essentially stealing the soul of Black culture. And that was the point that Richard Matheson was making by ventriloquizing himself in the story using the voice of an African-American character. And the point of the poem was to make a very urgent, necessary point about cultural appropriation. What an irony. But of course, with writers, I don't believe there is any such thing as cultural appropriation if your motive is true. If, however, you are simply being a parasite of somebody else's culture, that's a different matter. But I think it's a very nuanced argument. For my part, if you want to run away with the leprechauns, the she, the slur she, the pukas, you can, off with you. That's what I say, off with you. But if you're going to do it, remember, some of your readers are going to be Irish. And if you're not good, if your writing isn't good, their readership will condemn you. And it's the same with anything. It's the same with any of us, any writers through the world. We will live or die really at the whim of our readers. So we have to be good. So I'm not really worried so much about people running off with Irish culture, because if they make a hash of it, who's going to read them? You know, as readers, we're just going to laugh at them. So, and as an Irish writer as well, I feel I want to move beyond that myself and do something else with my culture. And, you know, our cultures are changing, aren't they? In 20 years, I've seen Ireland change beyond recognition. But that's a cliche, isn't it? Don't we say that in every culture and every country in the world? We say that every 10 or 20 years. Every generation says, oh, the world has changed beyond recognition. So, yeah, you want to steal my culture? Good luck to you. But if you don't do it well, it'll be bad luck for you. And that's the way I look at it.
That's very generous, John.
Oh, I don't know. Because there's a curse implicit in it.
I heard that
That's
too.
the thing.
I heard that too.
No, it doesn't bother me personally as a writer. Look,
Like
I would have,
like the Tomb Raiders, you know. Yeah, be careful.
yeah, you see,
Open up.
there is that. I would have read it, except it's in another room. I have a poem that has just been published in a literary journal called Southward, which is an Irish-based journal, but it's an international poetry journal and fiction journal.
Mm-hmm.
And the story is called The Stars in the Buttons. And it's from the voice of a young girl in Syria.
Mm.
And it is the comment of the evil that is perpetrated on the people there. So it's a political statement. Now, to make that political statement, I had to put myself inside a Syrian as a writer. So we have to ask ourselves, is that cultural appropriation, or are we going to give ourselves the right to comment on the world as it is today and the evils in the world today?
Well, we must. I mean,
I think so.
I'm with you. I have not always been able to make my particular silos integrate, but I do absolutely have practice of writing poetry about what's wrong with the world. And I hope someday to be able to do it well enough and subtly enough so that maybe my speculative can also reflect that. But I feel that and I hear you. Let me ask you a different question from your reading tonight. What is it about moths? More than once you are moths are moths, you have them eating light in a couple of different poems, or or as these terrible figures. So what's wrong with moths? Why moths?
Actually, I see moths in a very positive way, but sometimes they're negative. Can I explain by that? Angels we perceive and through mythologies as positive, but also angels are harbingers of destruction. I see moths as angelic. So moths appear a lot in my writing, but they appear in both their aspects, their light aspect and their dark aspect. In some of the poems I read today, they had both aspects because they are the harbingers of both light and darkness. And they are consumed by light, aren't they? You know, when moths flit around the light bulb or a candle, they evaporate in the flame. I see moths as very wonderful, metaphorical angels, and that's why they appear a lot. But I actually have animals appear a lot in a shamanistic way in my poetry, but insects.
The father's father, father's father. I love that one. My father's 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 father.
Thank you. But as you can see in that, even with the earwigs,
Yes.
insects are something in my writing that I see in a metaphorical, I use in a metaphorical sense. That's my aspiration anyway.
I think you achieve it. It's wonderful. This has
Thank you.
been such a. Are there any other questions as we come toward the end of our hour? So okay, that means I get to ask you something else. You already began to speak to this, that you started writing at 19 in 1977. But what made you want to write at 19 in 1977?
That's a very good question, and I'm going to give you. I think it's the only answer I have. When I was a really young child, I remember distinctly. You know, every boy wants to be an astronaut or they want to be a soldier, but I remember distinctly as a very young boy not ever wanting to be a writer. And I'll tell you why. Because, you know, I love stories and I loved poems, but all the poets that I ever heard about, Robert Louis Stevenson, Edgar Allan Poe, John Keats, they all died in misery, in poverty, without their girlfriends. Some of them never had a girlfriend. And I used to think to myself as a young boy, why would anybody want that job? Now, that's a serious answer because I realized later that what I was trying to do as a young boy was to deny my destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that I had a calling to poetry long before I was born. And I was aware of that. And I was trying.
You were
You know,
resisting.
I was resisting. When I got to the age of 19, there's a phrase here in Ireland, but it's probably common throughout the world, where we say it broke out in me. Well, poetry broke out in me. It's like a disease. In fact, I see it as a disease. You know, some people talk about poetry as a career. You know, all these foolish people say they want a career in poetry. It's a disease. The only two things
It's a compulsion. It's a compulsion.
It's not. It's a disease. You have two things. You'll get a diagnosis. Sorry, you're a poet, and and then you get a prognosis, and it's bleak. And I do nothing else. I would do nothing else. But writing was breaking out in me through my younger years, and by the time I got to 19, I realized that I actually felt energized and confident through the process of creating story and poetry and writing. I wasn't very good at it. I'm still learning. Till the day they stick me in the ground or set fire to me or whatever, I will still be learning, because the apprenticeship to writing and to poetry, as we all know, is never ending. So we have to keep at it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And can I say now, you've been praising me. Akua, the greatest of praise to you for setting up this series of readings. I mean, it's great for poetry. It's great for poets. I've been following them online afterwards, and they're great. And it's good to find other poets on the same spectrum as ourselves, but practicing it in different ways, because that's inspiring for us. So thank you. And I'm
You are
honored.
so
Thank you so
welcome.
much for having me on this series.
You are sheer joy. This has been incredible delight. Thank you. Happy New Year to everyone who's here and listening. Happy New Year, John. I look forward to your new. Tell us, please let us know. I'm not using the royal we. I'm saying everyone know. And if you're going to do, I'll make you this offer. Is there to do a book party for the new book when it comes out? Please let us know. We'd love to hear you again. You're such a wonderful reader. You're such a warm and delightful person. And let the last words be yours. Please tell people about the backdrop, and then we'll say goodbye.
Okay. Well, first of all, before I say about the backdrop, if anyone has questions and they don't know me and they're not my friends on Facebook, send me a friend request and ask me the question. The painting here is by my son, Sexton, who's an artist. And he, this is actually, it's of a giant. I don't know if you can see it in his Y-fronts, in his underpants, and he's fast asleep. It isn't a riff on the giant in Gulliver's Travels, because as I was saying to Akua beforehand, that image of a giant surrounded by smaller people is actually very ancient. And this series of paintings by my son Jared is based on a series of ancient Persian paintings. And this image of the giant and people celebrating around the sleeping giant is actually based on a Persian original. So there you go. Painting by my son, Jared Sexton. And it's great to be surrounded by my son's talent. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Akua, once again. Thank you.